Madonna. There was nobody like her.
I'm interested both technically and metaphorically how you go about creating such iconic images.
When you go in to take an iconic picture, you hope certain people walk on water. Most people don't.
What were the biggest lessons that you can remember that maybe you still take with you today?
You're dealing with another human being. You don't know what's going to happen. The best pictures I've ever taken were mistakes.
How you get money out of your art.
How do I create something that is successful? I think the lesson learned.
Welcome to the Mood Podcast, uncovering the art of conversation through the lens of photography and creativity, one frame at a time. I'm your host, Matt Jacob, and thank you so much for joining me in today's conversation. And today, I have the privilege of speaking with Richard Corman, a legendary portrait photographer whose career spans over 4 decades. Richard has captured some of the most iconic figures of our time: Madonna, Nelson Mandela, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Muhammad Ali, and countless others. Each image carries his signature blend of intimacy, authenticity, and cinematic depth. Trained under Richard Avedon, his work combines technical mastery with a really deep understanding of human nature, making him one of the most revered portrait photographers in the industry. In my conversation with him, we did explore the art of capturing raw emotion, what it takes to truly connect with the subject, and how photography has evolved over the years. We discussed some of his legendary images and how he approaches the responsibility of portraying cultural icons. This episode is filled with wisdom, his personal stories, and a deep reflection on what it means to create meaningful work that really stands the test of time. So now I bring you Richard Corman. Richard Corman, welcome to the Mood Podcast.
So happy to be here.
So great to have you here.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've tried to organize this, but it's happening. We're here. You're there. I'm here. And it feels like we're sitting right next to each other.
Yeah, the beauty of technology these days. You're in New York. I'm over here in Bali. And our mutual connection, Peter Hurley, put us in touch, which I'm incredibly grateful for. We've got a lot to talk about today. So hopefully we can really dive deep into your huge pedigree in photography. And for me, in a self-interest standpoint, I'm excited to really learn more about you, but really learn more about how you create such incredible images and how you have done and how things have changed. So in order to start, I really just wanted to kind of try and give you a chance to put a label on the last 4 decades of being in photography and give me an idea of what you feel your impact on the world has been with regards to your work.
Wow, Matt, that's a big one. I would never say that I've changed the world or shaped the world. What I will say, it's been 40 years of curiosity. It's been 40 years of a fierce determination to get to know people and to communicate with people. I think that is, if I have one gift, it's that ability to connect with people. I'm passionately curious about all kinds of folks, people you know, people you don't know. Started in the early 80s, was prepared to go on to school in graduate school in psychology, took a year off. Photography found me. And was at that point, I just made that decision that it's here to stay. I landed, a job apprenticing my hero, Richard Avedon, where I spent a few years, which was ultimately life-changing. Would not be here today if it wasn't for that experience. And 40 some odd years later, I continue to be as passionate and as surprised by what happens in front of my camera on a constant basis.
Well, that's great to hear. Great to hear that curiosity remains ever present. Tell us how you mentioned how the photography found you. Tell us that that journey and that the journey in the beginnings of how photography actually found you?
I was given a camera. I was a shy kid who really sports was my thing. I lived through basketball. It was my formal education in socializing myself and being invited into different parts of New York City with different types of people that otherwise I would not have been able to connect with. I started taking pictures. The photographs I took were solitary. The last thing I wanted to do was place a human being in front of my camera because I was terrified about that responsibility. And I was photographing cityscapes. I'd get up at 5 in the morning and I'd go downtown and I would just follow the light as it rose and just experimented. I was fiercely determined to see something new every morning, and it was addicting, and I couldn't stop. And although my day job was, I was doing research for somebody in the psych department at the university I was at, and I continued to photograph. And all of a sudden, I realized, it might be a good idea to uh, focus my camera on others. And the way I did that, the way I transitioned into people was I would photographing my friends. I would bring my camera everywhere. If it was a gathering, a dinner, a party, a walk in the park, a sporting event, I would just bring my camera and began to feel a little bit more comfortable with other people. And that's really, it was that simple a transition, but I just loved the process. Like every young photographer, printing and processing in my kitchen or in my bathroom, and the magic of seeing an image show up on a sheet of one-dimensional paper was mind-boggling and exciting, and ultimately, uh, uh, as I say, addictive. It was my beautiful addiction, if you will. I couldn't stop. I could not stop. I didn't I didn't take classes, one here and there, but ultimately I was learning by apprenticing other photographers and assisting other photographers. Some of them miserable people and miserable photographers, but nonetheless, I gained a lot of knowledge as to what I would want to do and what I wouldn't want to do. And it wasn't until I was in the right place at the right time that I was told that Richard Avedon was looking for an assistant. I had just seen his exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum, and I thought, well, if that was ever possible, that would be the ultimate, to apprentice somebody like that who I had such respect for. And I did. I went over and met their studio manager, who connected me with Dick, and he interviewed me while he was literally shaving in his bathroom and ready to go out to the theater that night. And I was hired on the spot. And the next morning, I was there, and it's when everything turned. And I began to see things in a different light, literally and metaphorically. I was I was looking at quality over quantity. I was seeing behind the eyes of somebody who was so committed to photographing all kinds of people and getting the most out of those individuals. And how he did it was unique, and his thought process was genius, whether you like his work or not. And ultimately, today, I I think of him often. My goal is always to try to see something behind somebody's eyes and to pull it out so that they can tell their own story. even though, as we both know, when taking a picture of someone, you are also really taking a portrait of yourself, because these are decisions we all make. If you were taking if you were taking the same picture I was side by side, it would look different, and vice versa. And I find that incredibly inspiring. And and I also enjoy sharing it with people. There's no there's no secrets. I enjoy, passing it on.
Yeah, I wish there were more people like you in that respect. But just going back to your kind of almost as yeah, I think you've had probably, and we'll talk about this, many seminal moments in your career and pivotal points where you've become either recognized or you've gone to the next kind of season in your next chapter in your photography career. But obviously, it seems the real genesis of your profession and creativity and art came from that apprenticeship. Is that something that you feel we need more of these days, especially in the photography industry? I mean, I've always personally always just almost been desperate for a mentor or someone that I can just sit alongside and watch and soak up and be that sponge, especially in my early years. Now everyone seems to be self-taught. Everyone seems to kind of think they know what they're doing, and really we're just scratching the surface. Was that something that you feel was so important to you that has almost been lost today, and that it would be good for the industry and for us as artists if there were more apprenticeships like that?
Look, I don't think we can go back. That was an analog time. It also meant that communicating people was different. It wasn't what we're doing now. It was standing in front of somebody, and being next to somebody, and touching somebody and having that experience. Dick was very generous at times, so that was certainly enlightening. Uh, can it change today? Sure, but it's different. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't better. It was different. People say, "Well, do you shoot film or do you shoot analog?" I shoot both, but I'm basically a digital shooter because of the I don't want to say simplicity, but because of the immediacy of it. Back in the day, we would take a picture and it would take, maybe a couple of weeks to, process film, put contact sheets together, edit the film. By the by the time you brought it down to your subjects, it was a week or so later. Uh, but it was a beautiful thing. It was a beautiful process. I'd travel all over the world and I'd shoot hundreds of rolls of film, not knowing if the pictures were sharp, not knowing, what I mean, the surprise of processing and seeing it, you know, could be weeks later, could be on a journey that took weeks, was exciting and unnerving at the same time. We now, are capturing to a monitor in many cases, and we know, or we think we might know, if we've got that image, that one or two or maybe more that means something to me, and hopefully will mean something to that person. Um, so mentorship, I think, is important. I think it's a wonderful thing. Uh, uh, I love, especially when young students or people come in and ask all kinds of questions, some that they feel embarrassed to ask, but there's no silly question. It's I'm happy to share. I'm happy to, if somebody wants to know what lens or what f-stop. I mean, I could care less about those things, but if it makes them, gives them a certain calm, or some knowledge that they can walk away with, great. The one thing I say, it is always about communication, always. And that does seem to be lacking. I have young interns and assistants that I work with that are brilliant, you know, technically brilliant. I can't compete with it. I can barely turn my camera on, and these are people that can run circles around me, but they cannot look you in the eye and have a conversation. That's painful, you know, uh, and I
And
believe
that's really what I'm trying to get to, Richard. Is in the most subtle and polite way. It's kind of what I'm getting to. Is we're losing that human connection and those social skills. But and no one's fault. It's just the way that society has developed, especially in the digitized social media AI world that we're in now. It's only going to get worse, and people are going to be even more ostracized than they were. And I think photography, and certainly the way you and I photograph, although different styles and everything, but we photograph people. We you have to have those skills to some respect. Yes.
absolutely, look, you need to know your craft, and no doubt, you need to know what you're doing. There's certain uh, there's equipment, there's lighting, there's all of that one needs to know. But ultimately, the pictures that move me are the ones that move me. you know, they can be technically way off, but yet there's something that just some of the best pictures I've ever taken were mistakes. We've all done it, whether it's a double exposure, whether there's too much movement, or the jolt of the camera, and it's like, wow, that has a little humanity to it. There's something about that that works, and it's lovely to see.
What were the biggest lessons that you can remember that maybe you still take with you today? What were the biggest lessons that you learned from that apprenticeship with Richard Avedon?
Well, I think the lesson I learned uh, prior to that was from my father, which was humility, and understanding that we are not curing cancer here. We are taking photographs. Now, you and I both know it's what we live for. We love that process. We love that that ability to communicate with people, and we love the ability to tell stories. We're both storytellers, and that remains on par with anything else. But Dick Avedon was somebody who was prepared, who lived. He was always at the theater. He was always reading a book. He was always, at the latest opening for a movie. He was an art connoisseur. Um, but everything was about his work. And I think there were also things that were missing in his life. I mean, he had a family, but I can't say that was particularly successful. He was egocentric. He was, and everything revolved around his work, for better and for worse. And these are decisions we all make. Uh, uh, for me, the most important thing to me were my friends and family. I mean, that was always the priority. And I think, Matt, quite frankly, in terms of my career, yes, I've been very fortunate. I've been able to photograph pretty much everybody I've ever wanted to photograph, but I've fallen under the radar, quite frankly, because I'm not somebody who really wants to get up on a pedestal and say, look at me. I I always thought the work would speak for itself, but I'm here to tell you that it cannot. You need those around you that can help push it forward, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you, that I'm the greatest photographer in the world. If somebody else wants to say it, fine, but you would never hear that coming out of my mouth. Uh, so I think there were moments when I could have taken advantage of fame and fortune, and I didn't because it wasn't the most important to me at that time. It was more important to support a friend or to uh, play in a basketball game or to just read a book. I didn't go to the parties. I didn't, even though I'd been to all the places you've heard of too many times. But it wasn't. It was a lifestyle, but it wasn't really. I didn't go all in, and I think that is part of the game. Everybody wants to be doing what we're doing. There's so many young artists out there, photographers in general, and New York City, the competition is brutal. It's just brutal. It's uh, it is my creative carnival, if you will. New York City, I walk out on the street, my mind is blown every day. I sit on a subway or a train. I cannot believe what I'm looking at. I cannot believe the diversity. I cannot believe the languages spoken, what people are wearing, the swag they have. But at the same time, uh, uh, it's it's a rough place to do what I'm doing. I wouldn't wish it on anybody that I truly loved. It's not easy being a freelance artist. I mean, at 70 years old, I am a freelance artist. I am no different than you or anybody else, other than the fact that I have more experience and maybe a few more pictures in a portfolio. But I am out there selling myself in my own way and exhibiting work in hopes that people will buy into it, and sharing work and telling stories, hoping that people will buy into it, uh, and talking to creatives in hopes that they'll allow me to take a series of pictures that interest me and invest in it and fund it. It never ends. The journey never ends, and you never want it to end. Uh, you continue to climb the mountain.
Yeah, I think it's important that people hear that, and it's very fascinating that if you go back to the 80s when you first, I guess, started, making a name for yourself with, obviously the Madonna photos, Jean-Michel Basquiat, that culture back then in New York, the huge art scene exploding, and yet still, it sounds like you were a little bit withdrawn from that lifestyle, or didn't necessarily want to be that person who was the new artist on the scene, going to all these kind of funky parties and being involved with that culture. But maybe I'm speaking out of turn there, but it's something I think that's important for photographers and artists today, just to know that, especially today, actually, where competition is so rife on the street, let alone on the digital side of things, where social media, the competition out there is just insane. You cannot allow the work just to speak for yourself. I mean, you can, but you can't then just expect. And I've fallen into this trap with not just photography but business as well. Create something you think is amazing, and then just sit back and wait for them to come. It just doesn't work. You have to be able to be comfortable in selling yourself hopefully in the most ethical and professional way,
Correct.
but being good at business in that respect, being good at sales, marketing, business, as well as trying to remember that you want to be a photographer, and that you've got to keep crafting at that as well. It's not easy, and if you can find some way to enjoy that process and to be good at it, then you're on the right track. But you talked about what interests you today in terms of photography and exhibitions and working with other creatives. Tell me what does interest you today. That as we're sat here talking, what are the photographs and the stories and the images that you want to create today? What is it that interests you?
Let me just step back for a second, because you brought up the 80s, which was wild. Um, And the folks that I was photographing, these were humans that I'd never been around before. Uh, Madonna, there was nobody like her, whether you like her or not, she was fearless, absolutely fearless. And nothing was going to stop her from getting to the next level. The first question I asked her just as I was meeting her, what are your goals? Where do you want to go? She says, I want to change the world, and it was not tongue in cheek. She was absolutely serious. And the way she looked and the way she dressed and that self-confidence, or what seemed to be self-confidence, and that beauty was authentic, real, and remarkable. No doubt. When I walked into Jean-Michel Basquiat's studio in 1984, which was Warhol's studio, and he knew I was coming, and I walked in and there were 30 kids there. I mean, we were all kids. And there was drugs and smoke and his mural on the wall and on the floor, and people were walking all over them. And there was a rawness to it. And this young man was just kind of huddled in the corner, just in his own world. And it was Jean-Michel. And I went over and introduced myself. And I just kind of removed him from that insanity. And I had a little piece of 4x4 gray paper I tacked to the wall. I said, can we move over here? This was for a shoot for Italian Vogue. They gave me a jacket that he needed to wear. He said, just make sure he puts this, he said, just make sure he puts that jacket on. And he did. And he just kind of owned it. And here was a complicated genius who some of his art I knew about, but I didn't really understand his mental process. And as we know today, his work is as relevant today as it ever was. Remarkable. I mean, absolutely remarkable. And he was present for me. He gave me everything I could have asked for. In just such a quiet, simple way. I often say, Matt, that sometimes when we start out, knowing less is knowing more, because today we have too much information. If I was to go out and photograph today's Jean-Michel, I might have 15 people around me. Back then it was just me and him. I had an assistant holding a light. It was no big deal. Today it would have been a big deal, because, as I said, where would I photograph him? How would I light him? Would it be ambient light? Would it be strobe? Would it be a mix? Is it at the end of the day? Is it at as the sun comes up? Is it in open shade? Is it in, there are so many decisions we have to make as photographers and as artists, because you have a blank canvas, and how are you going to fill it? Is it going to be the gray wall that you're sitting against, or is it going to be a location that I'm sitting against? It starts with all of that. And then I can easily overthink anything. So when I look back, and I recommend to all young artists, look at the work you did when you first started, that you haven't looked at. It could be in 3 years. It could be 10 years ago. You will be shocked at some of the things that you missed and you pushed aside. Well, I didn't know what I was doing. The light was off. Well, maybe it's not that important. Maybe that's what makes it so striking. So those are the things I've learned over the years. And again, it was just me, a little Rolleiflex camera, one light, maybe a fill card, and running around and taking pictures of these folks and spending time with them. Yes, I was not a party guy, but I did go to the Studio 54s, all of these places, and they were always all together. Basquiat and Keith Haring and Madonna and Francesco Clemente.
Really?
And yes, because there was, again, it was that analog sense of community and communication. They were sharing ideas. They were inspired by each other. I mean, that's what it seemed to me. I mean, Madonna was dating, Basquiat and Keith Haring. I mean, the three of them were inseparable. And that was, again, inspiring to see those folks together. And that's why today I think it's so important for all of us to share the wealth, um, and and continue to communicate and to share some of the knowledge or the experience that we've all had.
Now, with these shoots with Madonna and Jean-Michel, and we'll talk about some of the other iconic images that you've made. Were those early photographs and projects while you were working with Richard Avedon, or were they
It's
pre
good,
or
good,
post? Or
good question. So when I was working with Dick, I always tried on weekends to do something for me because it was very easy. You know, I loved him and I loved what he did, but you begin to see everything through his eyes and you get a little jaded because every picture you take is a white background, a certain sensibility, and you're not him and you cannot be him. And you can certainly try to emulate, but I think it does in the long run more harm than good. Um, so Madonna was I was working with Dick, and it was ironically my mom was a casting director at the time, and she was casting a movie for Martin Scorsese. And she brought this girl in, and she was blown away by her. And I always said to her, Mom, if you meet anybody of interest you think are intriguing, let me know, because on weekends I can, have some time. I could meet up and potentially photograph and build a portfolio. And she said, well, I just met this young woman, uh, and she's an absolute original. I've never met anybody like her. You need to call her now. So I called her, and the next morning I was down there. I mean, it was just crazy. It would never happen like that today. You know this. It just doesn't happen that way, because everybody is so guarded and protective, and and who is this guy calling me? And I don't know. There was a certain, let's just call it naivete, but um, uh, but that's the way it worked. When I had left Dick's, I was one of the things about working for Avedon. When I left his studio, doors opened for me because I had access, and he gave me access to knocking on people's doors. But I'm here to tell you, you get one shot. And the door will open, but it can close quickly. And the pressure was always, Matt, how do I create something that is successful? And of course, I've tripped over my own feet along the way, but I've also think there were some that allowed me to keep going, whether it was, and it was all editorial work. Back in the day, that's how it was free promotion. There's your picture with your name underneath it. So if an ad agency wanted to know who took that picture of that person standing on their head, it was like, oh, that's Richard Corman. Let's get in touch with him. Let's find out where he is. So that gave us carte blanche to free exposure. You got paid $30 a page for a magazine, or $60 for a cover if you were lucky. Uh, and if you were lucky, ever getting paid, especially the European publications. They were notorious. It just took forever. And that's how it began.
yeah, I mean, and you eventually, right? You kind of, I mean, the list of the icons that you photographed are are almost endless. But you've got Darcy Kistler on behind you on the wall there. Madonna, obviously, Jean-Michel Basquiat with Nelson Mandela, Muhammad Ali, Michael Jordan, Meryl Streep, Robert De Niro, Philip Seymour Hoffman. The list goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And that's not just dropping names, because you look at these images and they are iconic images. They speak to a sensibility, but they also speak to a strength and a real honesty in those photographs. Really, really very powerful and inspiring. But what I'm keen to touch on something you just said about almost stepping out of Richard Avedon's shadow, and it's certainly in the style and the way you wanted to shoot. But looking back at those, a lot of the iconic images that you shot, maybe iconic is too much of a broad label, but I'm interested both technically and metaphorically how you go about creating such iconic images. And maybe it's just spur of the moment or mistakes like you talked about, but tell me your process back then about, how you would go about making a subject iconic in a photograph.
Well, I never try to make somebody iconic in a photograph. But what I do is try to make a photograph approachable, accessible, real, and maybe at that moment the best truths in those people that I'm photographing. How do I draw that out? So you mentioned Darcy Kistler behind me. Here's one of the greatest. I was asked to do the New York City Ballet campaign in 1995, and we were photographing all their iconic dancers and iconic ballets. And this was, of course, Swan Lake. So here I am, a kid from New York City, and all I can think of is a pond in front of the Plaza Hotel. But how the hell do you do that? Well, it's like, well, you build a stage, and you build it underwater. And you create an 8 by 8 foot piece of plexiglass, an eighth of an inch below the water, so that we can row her out there and put her on there so that she can stand on point with just a little bit of water, so that it almost looks like she's walking on water. But I never wanted to hide the water. I didn't want it to be a trick. It's like, whoa, it's like she's walking on water. You see the stage. And it was magical. It was 5:30 in the morning. The sun was rising in the east. And I have this gorgeous creature who happens to be this brilliant artist. We have guys and waiters pushing her out on a boat. I have 50 people behind me. And she steps onto this and she becomes this swan in the most elegant, beautiful. It's almost as if she's hanging from a string and you just set her down there. It was beyond glorious. And I think one of the things that I've been privy to over the years is also photographing artists, whether they're entertainers, singers, dancers, in character. And in many ways, it's a lot easier for them. It's easier for Darcy to be that swan than to be Darcy, if you will.
Philip Seymour Hoffman.
As Capote, when Philip Seymour Hoffman walked into the studio, he was Capote, and he did not change for a moment. The sound of his voice, the gestures with his hands, the way he was dressed, the tilt of a head, the twinkle in his eye. He was never Philip Seymour Hoffman. He was Truman Capote. And it was genius. When Michael Douglas was Gordon Gekko, for Wall Street in 1987, he was that beast where, that famous line of greed is good. He portrayed that. He brought it to me. I knew what I needed to do, and I set him up in such a way so that it was easier for him. But he created that,
Give me an
character.
example. Like, how did you set it up for him that made it easier for him? Give me
Um,
specifics.
we were on set. We had 45 minutes. My assistant and I had looked all over. We had 5 or 6 locations preset because there were other actors as well to photograph. Every minute they stopped filming cost them thousands of dollars. So I had Oliver Stone and his producer, breathing down my neck because I had to create a campaign in moments. And so I set up, Michael behind his desk, that, that power office. And he leaned into me on that desk, and you just saw right behind his eyes, that, you know, fuck you, fuck the world. It's all about money and greed, and I will take it, you know, uh, uh, from everyone. And, that image has stood up, every time there's a financial crisis or there's a sense of greed or illicit trading, that picture pops up. It represents more than the movie. It represents, let's just call it a movement in you know, uh, in the financial world, and in most cases, not a healthy one. But it was a lot of fun to take, because it was fictional, but it was a beautiful moment. When I photographed Mandela in South Africa in his cell, I flew 27 hours to spend 7 minutes with him, and to shoot 9 frames. But I knew how important it would be. And this was I think the second time he had gone back to the cell where he had spent 17 years. The Robben Island had been closed to inmates, but he came back, and it was arguably the most powerful moment in my entire life, other than the birth of my child. It was like, I said to him, I said, this has to be so difficult for you to be back here. He says, it brings me such joy, because by that time he had changed the world, and he had brought so much integrity and empowerment to his people, to his community. I said to him, it's such an honor to meet you. Now, please know he didn't know who the hell I was. And he said, it is such an honor to meet you. And he said it with such generosity. And it wasn't just, it, it, there was no pretense to it other than he was just honoring another human being, and there was such humanity in that moment. And when he sat in his cell and that smile came out and that double exposure happened, it was like, and I didn't know this till I came back, it was, wow. It was like his spirit overseeing him, in some bizarre, beautiful, magical moment. And I'll never forget it. These are the things that you say when you go in to take an iconic picture. You hope certain people walk on water. This is the best way to describe it. I know how. Most people don't. You're dealing with another human being, Matt. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't. You think, well, it'll be an interesting photograph of just somebody's face because they're so interesting. Well, maybe before they shoot, they're sitting in the corner smoking a cigarette or something, and it's just so beautiful that that ends up being the picture. Or there's a window there that they're sitting in, or the light is it. You're dealing with the human condition, and you're dealing with complicated people. This is what I find fascinating about people. We are all so complicated. We come from complicated families, and we share it. At least to me, I see it in all kinds of ways. And My hope is that it tells the story to you who is looking at one of my pictures, and I'm not there to explain it. And it's your interpretation that's real, uh, not mine, even though I'm trying to share, uh, as I say, that best truth at that moment. But who knows?
Yeah, best truth. I like that. Best truth of the subject, but also of yourself, right? We talked about this at the start, how
Yeah, it is our diary. You know, I don't, I write occasionally, but I'm not a writer. I sometimes have to write the stories of the pictures, but this is our diary. I can look at any picture I've ever taken, and I don't necessarily have a great memory, and I can tell you what it smelled like. Because at that moment, Matt, there is nothing more important to me. I could have had the worst morning in my life, but when I am there and I am in it, I am in it 150%, uh, because I love the process and I feel responsible for you. Maybe too much, but I feel responsible for that individual. Uh,
and the people around. I mean, there's so many of your images and so many images that photographers take. We don't necessarily think about the effects they have on the people seeing them, right? The inspiration, the curiosity, the awareness, the intrigue, whatever it might be for the viewer, but also the people around in that moment. And this reminds me of a story that I hope you can tell us in your shoot with Madonna. I think you reconnected with a man 30 years later who got hold of you and told you what kind of that moment meant to him. I'm doing it disservice. Please tell us that
you're
story.
not,
It's
and it was an
fascinating.
interesting moment because I photographed Madonna with a group of kids on her rooftop. It was real. It was, you know, again, here you talk about, well, how do you make an iconic picture? It was never in my thought to bring up 4 or 5 kids from the neighborhood. Well, as it turns out, Madonna sang and danced with all of them on the rooftop 3 or 4 times a week. She was the Pied Piper of the neighborhood. And then she would have a pizza party in her one-room apartment. They would sit on her bed and have pizza, and they looked out for her. Well, as it turns out, over the years, and I think there were 4 or 5 of them, I think 2 or 3 of them passed from drugs and hit by a car and God knows what. And one of them had been imprisoned. And he saw that I was having an exhibit, a solo show at a place called Milk Gallery. And I'd never exhibited these pictures before. This was in 2013 with the launch of the book. And he reached out to me. He said, I was there. I'm the guy, and his name was LR. And I always thought that this was a kid who was 12 and he looked like he was 42. He had just aged. And his story was so compelling to me that I went up to the correctional institution and I met him and his wife. And then I went back with a film crew and I filmed an interview and took some pictures of him. And the story, we always see it through our eyes. We don't often hear from, as you're suggesting, from the others. Well, what was it like being photographed by me? Not like, you know, what was the, what did you feel? Did you feel I was some idiot? Did I bother you? Did I annoy you? But when I walked into that when I walked into that building, Madonna had said, you have to call me from across the street because it's very dangerous. There's a lot of drugs going on here. And he said, look, if Madonna hadn't given the okay, you would have been physically injured. because it was there were like 12 or 15 kids out there. But once I said I was there to see Madonna, the seas part, because there was so much love for her. So it was interesting to hear his perspective on that shoot and things about her that I didn't know, and how kind and generous she was with them, to them, for them. Uh, so it was memorable, to say the least.
How has, I mean, it seems like you can remember everything about that shoot over 40 years ago now. But how, and I asked this question with trepidation, but how do you feel photography has changed for the better or for the worse since then, right? Obviously, we've had so many evolutions and growths and changes in photography in terms of equipment, but in terms of commercial landscape as well. Looking back and talking about these moments, these experiences 40 years ago, how would you sum up kind of the journey that photography has been on over the last 4 decades?
As we talked about, I mean, we're talking about an analog world and a digitized world. So we're talking about process of communication, and we're talking about immediate gratification in the digital world. I think that is, um, I think those are some of the tenets of both that work for and against. Because today it's so immediate. Maybe you don't work as hard for a photograph because you see it captured onto the back of your camera or onto a monitor, and it's like, we got it, it's done. Well, maybe it wasn't done, but we just thought, well, that looks great. We don't need to push it any further. Whereas back in 1983, you didn't know what the hell you had. You just kept shooting. And kept communicating. It still is all about communication to me. It still is that. But
You mean with the people that you
with the
photograph?
people, it is a communicative process for me. It will never change. It will never be anything less than that. But you know, um, there's more fear today when you're taking somebody's picture. And if it happens to be somebody, it doesn't even matter if it's somebody of note. There's this fear of, I mean, as soon as I have that file, it can travel the world in seconds. You know, in 1983, it was like, there was a little bit of a safety net. It wasn't going anywhere. It couldn't go
Yeah,
anywhere.
it was
Uh,
yours.
it was yours, and I'll share it with you in a week or two. You know, and it was just different. The process was different, but people are not necessarily different. It was a different time, different capabilities.
What about the commercial side of it and the commercial landscape and ecosystem that we have to battle through daily as freelance photographers? Is it? Tell me the differences. Even 10 years ago, tell me what it's like. How you get money out of your art and what that process is, selling yourself and connections and networking and social media and all of the stuff that goes into waking up and trying to make a living from photography.
Um, from the beginning, it was, all editorial, and we were testing, it was called. You would go out and you'd find somebody that you were interested in, and you would take pictures. It wouldn't cost you anything. It wouldn't cost them anything. It was just as trying to figure it out. Who am I as an artist? Who am I as a photographer? What is it that separates me from you? uh, I never consciously thought of that, but the whole process, I mean, this is what we were doing. Uh, um, and then, you know, uh, and then we got into the editorial work, which just as we discussed earlier, which was a way of sharing the work globally so that people could see who the hell took that picture and could we work with him? Could I take Richard Corman and do a Coca-Cola campaign with him because he had that sensibility? That's how you transition from editorial into the commercial world. And then all of a sudden you needed representation because while I was out shooting, I need somebody, we used to build 6 to 10 portfolios. I mean, hard copy portfolios that would be, silver gelatin prints, 16 by 20 books that cost a fortune, custom made books. And they would travel the world. And while I was working, my agent would send things out to clients and art buyers and ad agencies, because at the time, the only way I could make a living was as a commercial photographer. You know, Today I make a living as a fine art photographer. I'm able to sell limited edition prints of work that I do. I'm not a commercial photographer anymore. It just so happens that there might be a very large commercial project coming up. I mean, it just happened literally a week ago. The largest thing I've ever done. I can't mention the name, but
Oh, I was going to say,
it's
tell us.
but it's just rare that those things happen for somebody like me. Um, uh, but I am constantly trying to. I'm not very effective on social media. I have a few thousand people that follow me. But I've been fairly successful at selling into the art world. And I think the hardest thing I've done in my career is cross that line between the commercial world and the fine art world. That's a tricky one because if they see you as the guy that shoots, the Coca-Cola ad, then you're a commercial photographer. If they see you as the guy that does all these stock images of beautiful landscapes or whatever, that's who you are. So it's a different landscape. I'm not very effective in the commercial world any longer. I did a lot of movie posters, which was a lot of my commercial work. A lot of athletes, Nike campaigns, a lot of magazine covers. I did a lot of commercial work. You know, HBO. I mean, I did all of it. But now I think my bread and butter is the fine art world, and I'm really proud of that. And trying desperately to make it as somebody who's respected by galleries and museums around the world. Not easy to do, particularly not easy to do with portraits, because a lot of people don't want to live with the face of somebody that they don't know in their home. I get that. I have people that walk into a gallery where I'm showing work. It's like, I can't live with him in my room. I said, okay. And yet the next person walks in and says, I have to have that. That represents peace to me. I need to live with that, whether it's somebody you know or don't know. In my case, most of the pictures I've taken are people you know, but it really is, art is so personal, Matt. What you want to live with or what you don't, what you like, what you don't like. Uh, it's that's a personal journey.
Yeah, I find I'd love to hear your thoughts on what the strategies are to sell prints these days. Certainly portraits. I found the same thing. I mean, I'm mostly a portrait photographer, and people just don't want random strangers on their wall. at the end of the day, the majority of people, they want maybe something a little bit more abstract, or a landscape, or architecture, or something like that. So I definitely empathize. But give us an idea for those that are watching and listening who might want to kind of up their game in the fine art world, and maybe have not been exhibited before in galleries, or featured in galleries, or exhibited in exhibitions. Tell us how you kind of navigate that world, and battle those barriers to entry.
Yeah. Uh, well, we will get, we're going to get it at some point when we have private time. I want to talk to you about what you do, because your work tends to be more ethereal. It tends to be groups of people that most of us do not touch, or these are people that we don't know. Where are they? Who are they? What part of the world are you in? They are pieces of sculpture. When you look at my pictures and you see Muhammad Ali, you know exactly who you're looking at. Now, he was my greatest hero. So to me, it's a no-brainer. I I could live with Muhammad Ali, forever. Um, uh, but for a lot of people, it's a different. It's different. So, what is the process? Uh, you knock on a lot of doors. You find a gallery that believes in you. You are persistent, respectfully persistent, and and a lot of times with me, it is literally walking into a gallery and say, I just want to introduce myself. And it is not easy to do because I don't like it. And it's uncomfortable because once again, I'm saying, you got to look at me, I photographed all these people, blah, blah. I can't say that, it's very hard to do that for me. Uh, it'd be easier for you to walk in and say, yeah, you should look at Richard's work. He's photographed some interesting folks. So I am working with someone now who's going to be doing all that legwork for me. And it's taken a while to find the right person. She's smart. She's a businesswoman. She's also a big art, she's an artist, so she gets it. So hopefully this will work. Everybody does it differently. It could be an image that goes viral that it's like, well, who is that artist? Uh, Social media, sure. A lot of people want to see videos. They want to see these sound bites where Richard is in front of Madonna. It's like, well, it was 1983 and I walked up, I was on the Lower East Side and I was introduced to her and I walked up and met her and I looked up the staircase and I saw these beautiful cat-like eyes looking down at me. And I knew right then and there that this was somebody to be reckoned with. This was, somebody special.
We're going to make that soundbite for you so you can share it.
Okay. And it goes on and on with the stories.
I feel like through the rhetoric of just having seen your work for so long, and now understanding a little bit more about you, I feel like there is a common denominator here of not necessarily being judged, but still that fear, still that kind of reticence to almost put yourself out there, or at least self-talk and talk, really sell yourself in these environments. And especially if you're crossing over from almost one sector to another, from commercial to fine art, or editorial to commercial, whatever it might be. This is something that we all share. How do you just kind of push through that?
Well, I think that little bit of anxiety, that those butterflies that you have in your stomach before a shoot, happens every time. It doesn't matter whom I'm photographing, whether it's the president of a country or whether it's the president of a bank. It is I feel it all. It always feels like the first time. Why? Because everybody that you meet is different and unique, and you don't really know uh, what to expect. I just finished a body of work. I have an exhibit up now on jazz musicians, uh,
Where
and
is
it
that exhibit?
at 473 Amsterdam Avenue in New York City. And Matt, it's remarkable because of uh, this community of people. I've never been around a group of people who, when they stand in front of the camera, their, you know, their soul, their energy, their um, their determination to share their love of music pours out of them. I pretty much don't. I become a voyeur. I don't, there isn't much I need to do. I can't explain it. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And it just, it's there. They are telling me the story, and they're giving me the privilege to shooting a few frames of them every time.
I don't accept that, Richard. I think you're being way too humble. Um, I want us to be able to try and identify how you are able to reveal who someone is rather than what they look like, right? And I'm sure after doing it for so long, it's just natural to you. It might just be an energy thing that people feel so comfortable around you. They feel so they can be vulnerable, they can be honest, transparent. But how do we really kind of pass that out, and how do we pass that on almost to beginners, to future generations who want that connection and wants that ability?
Maybe it's trust. It's certainly communication. Um, and a lot of people have a hard time doing that. Uh, um, uh, yes, I've had a lot of experience. Yes, when somebody comes in and it looks like he's 95, he's blind. It looks as if he's wearing his pajamas, and he's got a bass saxophone that is just so beautiful, and he sits in a chair, and the saxophone is kind of between his legs, and he just starts playing, and he's blind, and it's the most beautiful thing, and I start taking pictures because there's nothing else he needs to do. That's it. Why should I try to manipulate that? Because what we do is so manipulative, or can be.
Well, I
Uh,
think what I'm learning, and then hopefully the audience is learning that, and this goes into something else you've said before, and I'll try and quote you word for word. The experience of photographing somebody outweighs any photograph I could possibly take. So there is this philosophy and intention before you go into a shoot, whereas, look, I'm here for the experience. I want to embody the soul of the people that I'm photographing. I just want to soak up the experience. And I think if you have that intention going into anything that you might do, let alone photography, but anything, then you're going to impart that trust. You're going to really kind of allow people to be who they are without focusing on, right, I need the shot, I need the shot, I need the shot. Even if you do have 7 minutes to grab a shot on set because it's costing thousands and thousands of dollars.
I will quote you on the quote of mine. I will, I will quote you on that because it's so true. I mean, how can I share that experience of this beautiful gentleman who has so much wisdom and so much energy at that point in his life? He can't see any longer, but it's all about, you know, the art. It's all about sharing it with us. But it's the sound, that it just, I was in a little room at the Apollo Theater. I set up a studio the size of a closet because we had no more room to work in. And I've learned very early on, you don't need much more room to take a picture, to take a strong picture. and he filled the room. And it was magical. There was another instance where I was photographing 99 years old, arguably the greatest drummer, percussionist in the world, Roy Haynes, full on dementia, walks in with a purple suit and a cowboy hat. And he was so, uh, I, I can't explain it, but he was all over the place, all over the place. But there was a moment where he stopped and lifted his head a little bit, and just that eye contact, one frame. And it wasn't as if I was waiting for that, but I was prepared. One thing I've learned early on is you never put your camera down, in those kinds of situations, because that's when things happen and you just don't know. And that was another one of those moments. It's like that experience. Nobody will know looking at that picture that he has dementia. Nobody will know that story. Well, I'll have to tell the story as we're discussing it now and share it, which I do openly, because it was maybe he felt safe for a moment. Maybe there was just that cogent moment where he was with me. He was present. He was allowing me in. Uh, and it was beautiful.
Mm, sounds it. How do you how do you then go on and measure the success of something like that? I mean, we always talk about we as in Western society talk about being successful a lot, and you having, been in one industry for so long, and now a venerable expert, for sure. How do you look back and think about either legacy or success and these kind of buzzwords that might provide some kind of meaning or fulfillment to you, or is it that doesn't even enter your mind?
Look, I'm sure you want to leave a, a legacy. You'd like what you do to make a little bit of a difference. Um, uh, I'd like to be recognized as somebody who is formidable in terms of what I do. Uh, but uh, and I want to continue doing it. I don't know how else to say it. Somebody once asked me, "Do you think you're a great photographer?" I would never say that. I leave that up to other people. You know, it's not in my vocabulary. Uh, yeah,
What
I,
is the difference between good and great?
uh, I think great is being fearless, and I think that's a big part of what we do. Be fearless to put yourself in a situation that you're uncomfortable with, and if you're in it and you're uncomfortable, good. Because I think ultimately the best work can come from pushing yourself into a corner that doesn't quite suit you. And it happens all the time when you're dealing with people. It's like, oh my God, this is not working. What what can I do? How can I fix it? You know, uh, it's not like I'm taking a picture of a piece of architecture. Or, I'm with a human being. Where do I move them? How do I get through to them? Uh, Part of the process.
Yeah. What is the process for you moving forward? I think we've already touched upon this, but I know that maybe I'm gonna butcher another quote from you, but in my world it's always about the next, right? So what is which is a very delicate balance between being in the present moment, enjoying the process, but also planning for the future, working on future projects that you want to do, having ideas, especially as creatives, is just ideas flowing around all the time. What is next for you? What is it, it seems like the fine art world is something that you want to continue diving into. But
Because once that one photograph is taken of that gentleman with dementia, you're on to the next, and it's done. Uh, this group of
But if you
photographs,
exhibit and you publish, that you revisit those photographs, those stories, those
totally,
moments.
totally. I'm finishing up a documentary now where my photographs are a big part of it. It's on the transgender community in the military in the United States, and it's very powerful. Once again, why did I choose to do this? Because I was curious about this group of people that I knew nothing about, nothing. And I didn't understand why they were being so disenfranchised and pushed to the ground, and being murdered and uh, disrespected. These are patriots who are, out there fighting for our freedoms at home. And we have nothing but respect for those folks. And this is a documentary, hopefully will be out in a year or so. A friend of mine is directing it, but it's really a project that I've started 7 years ago, and we've been able to raise the funds to complete it. And it will, I think, be historic because of what's going on in the world today.
Why does that topic mean so much to you? Is it just purely out
Uh,
of curiosity? Is it something
um,
personal?
because it bothers me to see people, bullied like that. Uh, I've always been somebody that, I grew up with disabled brothers, and I was always trying to stand up for them. Painful, not easy, and always looking out for those less fortunate.
And is this now then moving into a realm of photography for impact, awareness, and hopefully change?
I've done it all my career. It's not been highlighted. I've spent since 1991, I've photographed athletes with intellectual disability with the Kennedys and the Shrivers, the Special Olympics all over the world. I've tried to empower these athletes. These are heroic people. They are the purest form of joy and love and determination that I've ever seen. I've worked with all kinds of nonprofits that are, fighting for folks that are less fortunate. Uh, Inclusion means everything to me. You know, these are people that deserve a shot, and they're quite frankly more able-bodied than there's nothing disabled about them. Uh, uh, I did a book called Glory, my first book in 1998, and it had a lot to do with world-class athletes and these athletes. Why? Because I thought when a Special Olympian holding his or her gold medal next to a Michael Jordan, it made Michael stronger, in juxtaposition, because there is such fire in their belly to succeed. They leave it all on the field. Uh, and that is a life lesson, of course.
Well, I've learned a lot of life lessons talking to you over the last hour or so. Thank you so much for joining me. What should we be watching out for, and where can people find you? I know you've got some books out there.
um,
Obviously, exhibitions. If you're in New York,
yeah,
documentary coming out. Where can we see all this?
the jazz exhibit goes from New York. It's going to New Orleans to the National Jazz Museum in New Orleans, which will be super cool. I have. Um, uh, there will be. I mean, the next book will probably be. I mean, you talk about legacy, maybe a retrospective of sorts. So it'll tell, more of an in-depth story, so that it's not just, anything subject matter specific. It would be from Madonna to Mandela to women on death row, if you will, because they're all, you know, humans that have complicated stories that I'd like to share. Um, so social media at Richard Corman. Um, yeah, uh, you can find me.
What do we have to? Last question. What do we have to think about as maybe beginner photographers, but hobbyists maybe wanting to go professional? How do we see photography and its industry moving forward over the next 5 to 10 years, and what do we have to be wary of?
Everybody's scared of AI, of course. But I think ultimately I tell every young photographer, just take pictures, get out there, get dirty. I don't care what camera you use. This was the lesson that, Dick Avedon said the same thing, just go take pictures, you know, um, and, uh, and find out who you are, and find out, as I said, if you and I were standing next to one another looking at the same exact scene, those photographs would look different. Try to create uh, a rhythm, a sense of who you are as an artist, if that's what you want to do. Whether it's a hobby, whether it's an inclination to turn professional, God forbid, because because it's painful,
Yeah,
but rewarding, and
you've got to love it. Yeah, you've got to
it's
love
more
it.
it's more than that. It's got to be in you, and there is no other recourse. You cannot not do it. And clearly, you have it. I have it, uh, and and be fearless and take chances and keep climbing.
I loved what you talked about being fearless, difference between good and great. So I'm gonna take that inspiration. I'm gonna go and take some photos and have my breakfast. And yeah, I look forward to speaking with you. More importantly, I look forward to seeing you in New York at some point.
We will.
Hopefully, in the next few months, I'll be there, and hopefully, you'll be there as well. And
I
I
look
can
forward,
buy you a
Matt.
coffee, and we can chat more.
And then I'll get on that plane and we'll go back to Bali,
Let's do it. Yeah,
That's what I'd like to do.
yeah.
And take pictures
You're
together
welcome anytime.
in Bali. Okay.
Oh, that would
Uh,
be amazing. Thank you
uh,
so much, Richard.
all right. Such a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. All the best.